Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by Beavers Edge writer and KEGO radio host TJ Mathewson. We're back here with another edition of the Edge podcast, coming to you following Oregon State's 26-19 win over Colorado to improve to 7-2 overall, 4-2 in the Pac-12, and the Beavers return home after nearly a month off from playing at Reser Stadium. The Beavers are back in the friendly confines this weekend for the first of a two-game homestand, starting with the Stanford Cardinal. TJ and I will be breaking it all down throughout the majority of this podcast. But TJ, good to talk with you, my man. How you been, and how's life treating you these days?
It's been good. It's going to be good to see you. So
I know.
besides the fact a month between home games, it's also a month between a Beavers Edge reunion a little
It's
bit.
true.
It'll be nice
It's
to have
true.
a home game again. It's been, middle of October was a while ago. That was right before my vacation, and that's almost
I
a month
know.
gone now too. So I'm keep thinking about that. So
I know. It
it's going to
feels
be
like a
good
lot.
to good to get back out to the stadium. It was nice to have a couple nights at home,
Sure.
a couple of late nights. I'll
Yes,
say it's a
very.
little bit easier to digest a road night game opposed to a
Oh,
home night game.
for sure, for sure.
But it's worked out all right, and I'm looking forward to this weekend. It's been a good stretch though for the Beavers. It certainly hasn't been short of storylines.
No, no doubt. And like you said, it's weird to think that UCLA game was the last home game. And it does feel like just yesterday on one token, but then when you're like, it's been a month, it has been a minute. And it's like, yeah, I'm excited to chit chat with you this weekend at the press box and, do our usual rounds. So it'll be fun for the Beavers Edge crew to bring you guys coverage on Saturday. So make sure to stay tuned to Beavers Edge for that and catch TJ obviously on KJO this weekend as well. So we'll both be busy previewing the matchup in various different ways. But yeah, TJ, let's go ahead and start talking about the matchup with Colorado. We obviously previewed it last week, had Nikki Edwards from our Colorado side on. A big shout out to her for telling us about the Buffs last week. And I think we kind of got what we knew about Colorado going into that game. There weren't really a whole lot of surprises from the Buffs, in my opinion, in that matchup. Big takeaways that I have from that game, just off the cuff. First thing, Oregon State's going to, again, style points clearly don't matter because Oregon State moved up in the college football playoff rankings. They're still being respected as the top two-loss team in the country. But TJ, in my opinion, that coulda, woulda, shoulda been a blowout, and that should have been a much bigger score margin, in my opinion. I think Oregon State left some meat on the bone in a big way. I mean, putting up 26 points. The yardage was about what Colorado allowed. It was a little less, surprisingly. But that was a team I wouldn't have expected it'd be a struggle to score on. I know everyone, like the week prior when we were talking about Arizona and the fake field goal, that was no good. Everyone, had a comment and had some thoughts on the 2-point conversion from Jonathan Smith that went over DJ's head. And that was another one that got put under the microscope this week. I have some thoughts on that, but I don't think it's I don't think it's detrimental. Like for instance, the fake field goal was, and then the fourth quarter defensive collapse. Like again, TJ, that's 2 straight weeks now that the defense in the fourth quarter has just struggled to stop a nosebleed, for the lack of better
Mm-hmm.
terms. And you were obviously talking to Trent Bray last week. Following the loss to Arizona, he mentioned some possible, fatigue. And then we talked to Jonathan on Monday. He had mentioned that, altitude didn't play a big factor, but guys like Coop and, some of the other Noble Thomas, some of the Isaac Hodgins, guys that didn't get a full week of practice, maybe were a little tired as the week went on. And obviously Colorado's receivers were making you keep a lot of DBs out there. But yeah, those are kind of the things that stood out to me the most, TJ. And obviously the one that's most concerning to me is that fourth quarter defense. I really do think that the offense maybe just, for lack of better terms, played down to Colorado a little bit. But that's 2 straight weeks where your defense does not look good in the fourth quarter. What are your thoughts on that? And what'd you see in the matchup, Teach?
Overall, the defense did play well. It was probably a mix of Oregon State actually playing well on defense, and also a mix of I'm not sure what Dion was doing with John Lewis last week. I have no idea. I don't know why
And
you
that's
bothered
true.
changing an offensive coordinator in the middle of the season. Regardless, that's not the point of this. That probably had some impact on it. They're a different play caller, different. I don't know what else behind the scenes that wasn't reported publicly was also changed around in the offensive structure. The
Sure.
Buffs offense was clearly off. They
Yeah.
whether it be the play of their offensive line, which has been bad all season, and the Beavers took advantage of it like we said they should, and they absolutely did. Ruined pretty much most of their offensive structure throughout the night. It was a lot of hero ball from Shedeur Sanders, and whenever he
Yeah.
had time to throw, he would do it. But like overall, the defensive performance was good enough. I can excuse one bad quarter for if I'm going to look at it on the other side. When you said the Beavers should have scored more points, they absolutely should have. This Beaver pass game for the last 2 weeks has been absent. Like
Yeah.
the top tier version of it, which they need, by the way, for
They do.
next week and the week after. They need that top tier passing game that we saw against Cal and then we saw against UCLA. It has been absent since the bye week. The two road games, it has not been there. They struggle to get DJ into rhythm early in the game. And so like just look at the first the first three drives. They go 3 and out, they fumble, Childs comes in, and then they fumble again.
Right.
And there might have been another punt mixed in there. I don't remember exactly, but the first half stunk.
Sure.
For that offense. It was bad. It was a bad offensive half. And when you could argue talent-wise and looking at this roster that the offense is a better unit than the defense is, like we should instead of looking at the defense that played very well for 3 quarters and gave up a couple late touchdowns that ended up not really mattering unless you gamble, opposed to your offense, which should be playing better than they are. Like they did not play well enough against Arizona, did not play well enough up to their standard against Colorado. And a lot of it has to do with the passing game. I'm sure there were people thrilled that they ran the ball 46 times against Colorado.
Sure.
It probably still could have been better. It wasn't an over-the-world rushing performance.
No,
it was good, but it wasn't running for 350 yards on Colorado, which would have been an amazing performance. But the offense is really for the offense to hit its top tier, it's not just running the football. They got to pass it as well. When DJ's 12 of 24 again and a little erratic and again, not able to get into rhythm early in games, it really holds the team back. And, if the offense put up 45 points, no one would have said a single word about the defense. Not a single word.
Yeah, and I must say this. Obviously, I started with a criticism, but at the end of the day, you have to look at it somewhat dually because while the fourth quarter defense wasn't great, this was still an Oregon State defense that held Colorado to -7 rushing yards. First time they held the opponent to negative rushing yards, TJ, since 2007. So
and you're facing an offense that averaged over 30 points a game and 400 yards of offense.
Absolutely.
Right? And they were held significantly below both of those averages.
So then what level of concern on a scale of 1 to 10 do you put on the fourth quarter defense these last 2 weeks? Because against Arizona we documented that, don't need to go over that again. But Colorado specifically, TJ, it really seemed like after that play where I don't think it was their very next drive, I believe it was the drive after, where Colorado returned that fumbled snap and went all the way back, right? And took it back for 2 points. I believe it was the drive after, not the very next drive, but the drive after where that was their first one of 2 soaring drives. And those 2 drives, everything started to come together for Colorado. So was that Oregon State thinking the game was over with it being 20 to 5? Yeah.
It was 23 to 5. 23 to 5.
Yes. So at that point, do you think Oregon State's defense was like, it's over? And that's why we saw that let up, because it had been dominant. You saw Easton Mascarenas flying all over the field. You saw the pass rush. Oh my goodness, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that, TJ. They got after Shedeur. They hit Shedeur. They made life really hard on Shedeur. I think it was 4 or 5 sacks and then about the same tackles for loss. But either way, guys were in the backfield. They were making plays, and Shedeur came in a little banged up, and they further banged him up, I think, a little bit and all that. But just what do you think changed? Because like last week we looked and we're like, wow, just a couple plays for Arizona's offense and that whole game flipped, right? The fourth quarter just completely flipped. If Colorado had been more competent, could this game have gone a different way?
Well, yeah. And if Colorado was more competent, the Beavers wouldn't have been favored by 2 touchdowns. But that's not the case.
Sure.
Because Colorado was not confident. My concern level for the defense, and specifically at the end of the game, is like a 3. Okay, because do you know what I can also say for both of this? If I'm just going to go back to my point, what I've already iterated, like the offense in the fourth quarter of the Arizona game had two chances to go down and win the game. Two.
Yep.
Like to go down and either put yourself up 10 or put yourself ahead and eat up a ton of clock and force
Right.
Arizona to make a play from behind. And you know what they didn't do? They didn't do that.
Neither.
They did not do that, not until the end of the game. And then in this game as well, right? Or like we could go to early on in the game where I say, they didn't score enough. They didn't get DJ in a rhythm enough. Like that was it. Again, if they score like what they should have against Colorado, which is at least 40 points, this is a non-story.
Right.
Like it is. They missed some tackles. Yeah. We figured this out. They're not a good tackling team. They're not. I don't know how that gets better down the stretch here when they're going to be facing two of the most talented teams in the country and two of the best offensive teams in the country in the final 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, and ridiculous
that's
skill position players.
So we know what they are, right? So when we see a good performance, it's like, okay, well, that was actually a positive sign. So they will build on that, and they're going to play better at home on defense because that's where they play better on defense.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's looking at, okay, where should the true strength of this team be, which is their offense, and how do they get it back to an elite level? Because that's what's going to be the difference between them winning out and potentially going to the Pac-12 championship game or just going right back to the Vegas Bowl.
Right, and I think we'll get into why I think they have a prime opportunity to do that against Stanford and the massive number of yards that the Cardinal have allowed this season. Gotten a little better recently, but we'll definitely dive into the Cardinal here momentarily. But we talked about the defense, TJ. Flipping gears to the offense, you mentioned Damian Martinez, and they really made an emphasis getting him and Deshaun Fenwick involved. And then you talk about the fumbles from those guys. That takes points off the board too. So I think there are a lot of factors at play in that particular game for why it ended up kind of being a bit of an ugly win, I would say, of sorts. But if there was an area of concern offensively, TJ, you mentioned the receiving game. Totally agree. It's kind of gone quiet these last 2 weeks. Offensive line did probably the worst job protecting DJ all year.
Yeah, they were letting those blitzers get through pretty easily. Colorado they knew they had to send extra guys to go get them, and it was very effective. And usually when you're sending extra guys, you're throwing at the blitz. You're throwing to where the numbers are short. But when your passing game is inconsistent and scattered, that you can get to the quarterback. And DJ, the problem against Arizona was him being too hesitant. I didn't think he was overly hesitant against Colorado, but he did get hit a few times, and that's not supposed to happen with this group on the offensive line. Of course, Jake Levengood being out does not help.
Right, Jake Levengood and Jonathan Smith mentioned on Monday. It's good to hear he's not out for the season, TJ. I know that was a worry when Jonathan really didn't say much last week, and then we obviously didn't see him, didn't get any updates. Good to hear he's not out for the season, but based on what we heard during his press conference, I wouldn't expect him back this week. Again, just reading between the lines. Jake Levengood obviously is a upperclassman guy, so would he, potentially try to play in what would be senior day next week? Potentially. But again, it's hard, right? You can't just be like, hey, I'm going to play through injury. It doesn't quite work that way. It really does. I mean, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, TJ. Injuries are tricky. And, obviously like earlier this season, for example, you had Jonathan Smith say, I think it was the UCLA game when Jonathan Smith's like, yeah, Ryan Cooper played through an injury, and then ho-hum 2 weeks later, he didn't play against Arizona, right? So it's definitely the time of the year when those bumps and bruises are starting to hurt a lot more.
Yeah. And, health is an important factor. They could really use Jake Levengood back. They could. Tanner Miller's played well. He's played well. Grant Stark slid in there as well and played on the offensive line and was good. But there have been some times this year where the pass protection especially has been a little shaky, and it has thrown DJ off for sure.
Yeah, and again, it was interesting this last week because not only was Levengood out, TJ, Haneli Bloomfield also briefly exited with an injury. He only missed about 5 or 6 snaps, so potentially nothing to worry about long term. But when he was out, Flavio Gonzalez got in, and he played at left guard. So, it's interesting because coming into the year, TJ, we talked about the importance of Grant Stark kind of being that sixth man. We've seen him thrown in there when Levengood's been banged up. I can't remember if there was a game that Fuaga missed or if there was a game that can't remember if there was a game anybody else, but I feel like he's kind of just been put in various spots without looking at the participation chart right in front of me throughout this year. And I think he's been solid. Like this last week, he graded out analytics wise as a really good offensive lineman. I think he can help. The problem is, as you mentioned, when you insert and change that group that has been so cohesive, that's when things like communication that mean the difference between a sack or a blitz picked up and a blitz not picked up. Swapping those pieces, you're not quite as you don't have that same chemistry and cohesion that you have with that starting five that we saw all fall camp long.
And if you talk to Jim Mahalchek, he'll tell you how important that communication is. And
sure is.
when it's not all the way there, things can happen. It can be as simple as pass protection that gets left behind, that someone forgets about, and there's a free rusher in his face. Or it can be something as simple as snapping the football, which was a big point of concern when that snap goes over DJ's head and gets returned for 2 on that 2-point conversion. I know you had something you wanted to say about the analogy Jonathan used on Monday.
Yeah.
I got a good chuckle out of that. I thought it was good that, Jonathan was able to break out a smile a little bit. He's very stoic most of the time, but when he actually gets a chance to smile a little bit, he talks like a man from experience sitting at the blackjack table.
Yeah, no doubt. That was awesome. I know TJ, this is Jonathan Smith. He can't do his weekend stuff without watching the Edge podcast. So I know he watches each week. So got to make sure to say, Jonathan, obviously, shout out to you for making an awesome analogy, because after that, I kind of want to go sit at a table with you, my friend. But nevertheless, so he was asked about that play and if he thought he would tamper down the aggressiveness. And Jonathan said he likened it to being at a blackjack table. When you get dealt an 11, your dealer's showing 6. And he's like, you're going to double down. You're going to double your money, baby. And, it was a great chuckle from the entire media room that was. And I think that's, I don't know, like, it's just those little moments, like you said, TJ. We'll get into the analogy in a minute. Like, it's little moments like that that make me, like, and I think hopefully all of you too watching at home, Jonathan Smith's not all that different than any of us, right? It's that relatability. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it is, except I suck at blackjack, so.
Oh, you're talking to a good guy over here, TJ. All-time winnings are in the positive, my friend.
Oh, let's go.
Not by much, but I've had better luck.
I thought the analogy he used, though, like, it perfectly reflects his coaching style. Everything that he does, that everyone's like, oh, this is reckless. Oh, this is stupid. Why would you ever do something this aggressive? It's all a calculated risk. It's like playing blackjack. The odds are in your favor. That when the ball gets placed at the 1.5-yard line, you have the best offensive line in the conference, one of the 5 best in the country. You have a 250-pound quarterback. So what defense exactly is stopping you from gaining 1 yard running forward? It's like the Philadelphia Eagles running the tush-push play. Yeah. They know it works. And and Jonathan Smith knows if that ball gets snapped back to DJ, they get an extra point. So why aren't you doing it? I don't. Yeah. There was so much pushback from this. I don't understand the ultimate anger from Jonathan going for 2. Yeah. Coaches in the NFL do this all the time.
All the time.
When there's a penalty on an extra point, okay, why not go for 2? Like if you are a good 2-point team, why don't you go for 2? And that's exactly what Jonathan did. It's like we have the personnel to go for 2 on the 1-yard line whenever we want. So why wouldn't we pull that out if we have a chance to be aggressive? Sure. And ultimately, in his philosophy, says we just want to score as many points as possible. That's what that is.
Agreed, and I agree with everything you just said for sure. And it's perfectly put. In defense of that too, I would also say this, TJ, and at risk of frustrating anyone that's maybe listening to this podcast, I'm just going to ask a very plain and simple question, TJ. We can all sit here from the side and analyze, right? And can honestly, in hindsight, say, does Oregon State maybe have one less loss on their ledger with less aggression this year? Sure, you could make that case and you could sell it to me and I would believe it. But at the end of the day, going back to what TJ said about Jonathan being to himself, TJ, any of those awesome Beaver fans, and I'm going to say awesome is what you all are awesome, that were maybe critical of that particular aggressiveness. Do any of them know football better than Jonathan Smith? That's what I said. I think Jonathan Smith is a top. Oh boy, this will be interesting. Let's just go conservatively and say a top 15, top 20 coach in America. Let's just go conservatively for now because I think he very much fits in that mix. And at the end of the day, coaches are going to make mistakes. They're human, right? We're maybe seeing the greatest coach in NFL history can't win without the greatest quarterback in NFL history. So, things go up and down, right? Coaches make mistakes, and I'm not saying that it should just be blind with no one to answer to for Jonathan. But most times, TJ, like the majority of these moments this year, I've just kind of not been too critical of it because I look at it and go, Jonathan knows ball. He's a really good coach. He knows what it takes to win at Oregon State. And for those watching, listening, you should know that about 5 or 6 coaches in the history of Oregon State football have known how to win at this level, at this program, maybe even less in the modern era. TJ, you know what I mean there. And I just think Oregon State fans got to be like, Jonathan's our guy. We ride with him no matter what. You can maybe second guess some decisions. But like you said, I saw a lot of criticism too these last 2 weeks with his aggression. And I'm kind of like, it's his coaching. It's the same coaching aggressiveness that got you the win at Fresno State last year when 4th and 2 from the 2 or 4th and 1 or whatever it was, 3rd and whatever it was, last play of the game. And you're like, nope, we're going for it. Jack Coletto's going to go in. If we don't get him, we're going to lose. But same thing. You were a yard, 2 yards, whatever it was, out, and you won that game. You lose to Fresno State last year, TJ. How much does that change your roller coaster of a season, right? So I just think this is Jonathan's character, Jonathan's nature, and like I understand and totally respect people who want to say, maybe you should have done this, but like the real strong opinions I've seen these last 2 weeks, I just thought were a little unwarranted for somebody who, not to be dramatic, will probably have a statue built outside of Reser Stadium one day.
And I think it's also a little bit unfair to compare what he did against the Wildcats to what he did last week. Like what he did, the fake field goal, he said was the wrong call.
He did. He owned it. He owned it.
He said it. He said he was wrong. So it's like, okay, like what else do you want to hear? Right. So that was reckless aggressiveness. He agreed that was reckless, and that should not have been called. But like the 2-point conversion again, I just think people are like, they are frustrated by the result of it because the worst possible case scenario, like something that has like less than a 1% chance of happening, happened.
TJ,
and therefore therefore to some people that should never happen again. It's just like, that's a bad way, I think, to think about football, because there are more scenarios and where that pays off for you than where it does not.
Now, and I'll say that, TJ, I know one time in Oregon State's history that play had happened for them in 2000. I don't know that in my lifetime that I remember watching Oregon State football, I don't think that play's ever happened against them. So you're right. Like, you want to talk about rare? Like, getting a safety is like 3 times as likely as that. Like, it has to be the rarest play in college football.
Yeah.
So
it does. And like in that scenario set up perfectly. Center snaps the ball over the head of the quarterback in the shotgun. Like on the 1 yard line of a 2-point play. That's the only way that happens.
So, and I'll say this too. Shout out Tanner Miller. He's been a dude. He's had to move from right guard to center. TJ, how do you snap it over a guy who's 6'5"?
It's a good question.
Like, I'm just saying, like, compared to, if you had a Russell Wilson back there, 6 foot, 5'11" or whatnot, I could totally understand that. But for the most part, like, I would think it's a little tougher to snap that over DJ's head. He's a big body, big target, and it went way over his head. So, I think that's a play that can be overanalyzed to an extent. But, all that's to say, it didn't cost Oregon State when it came down to it. So I think my opinion on it is, I think Jonathan Smith is who he is. And again, not joking, you talk about the fact that he's the same way that Mike Riley took Oregon State out of 28. Sorry, Beaver fans that are screaming through this YouTube at me right now. Straight losing seasons in a row. and helped escape that. TJ, I'm not sure how many coaches could have got Oregon State out of what Gary Anderson put them into.
Yep. And
So
now we've seen when he's had a roster full of players he can compete with over the last 2 seasons, he is 17-5. Is that good enough?
So, yeah. So, like I said, the man might have a statue one day. So, like I said, right now, at least, I would encourage Oregon State fans to ride with Smith because there were a couple years ago when I think the idea of 10 games, let alone 10 games in back-to-back years, would have been foolhardy, to say the least. So I think you kind of have to stick with who you are as a coach. And I even go back to even Jonathan's first season in 2018, his second season in 2019, when they didn't make bowl games and they were not particularly great. There were still moments where they were aggressive then and it didn't pay off. So he's been this way his coaching career. I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock into like being concerned about that at all. And I think Oregon State fans are, for the most part, going to be very happy with what Jonathan Smith delivers on a week in, week out basis. And I think they're going to be happy with the results this weekend, TJ, because unlike last year, when these plucky, pesky Stanford trees nearly gave Oregon State the upset of the year and needed the Trayshawn miracle. I need to get my Mike Parker voice out for the miracle that was down there in Palo Alto last year. There's not going to be those fireworks this year. If this game was on the road, I would say, Oregon State might need to be careful. Yes, might need to be careful because this team is way more competent than Colorado. But Oregon State has lost to Caleb Williams at home in the last 3 years, including this year, so last 2 plus this year. And this Stanford team, as improving as they are, I feel very confident saying they're not going to come into Reser Stadium and pull off that upset, even with Oregon State maybe looking ahead to Washington.
It's funny we mentioned that their Oregon State fans would be more nervous playing on the road, and they would. I'd be honestly like the spread would still be like 2 touchdowns if they played down in Palo Alto, but I would not be comfortable if I was an Oregon State fan.
TJ, do you remember that game?
But Stanford's
was
actually
terrible last year.
I know.
They were terrible last year.
They're terrible last year, and they're probably going to finish with about the same record this year. I think they'll probably also end up finishing 3-9 this year, give or take. So we'll see on that. Yeah, they play Notre Dame to finish the season. So if Cal beats them, then they'll be 3-9, given the Beavers win this weekend. But Stanford's actually a better road team this year than their home. They actually are going to have a winning record on the road, believe it or not. That's kind of wild to think about. Troy Taylor really has done, like, for where the program is and what he has to deal with. It's not like Stanford lacks resources, judging
they don't.
the amount of cash that the university itself has. But in terms of building a college football program, like the NIL is mostly what I'm concerned about, and they can't accept transfers because of Stanford, because of the academic prowess of Stanford. It just makes his job a lot harder, but he's still done such a nice job turning that program around. I mean, his defense been awful all season long, and they go into Pullman and they allow 7 points to Washington State, and they win 10-7. Well, and something that looks like a Jim Harbaugh, David Shaw era Stanford team playing nitty-gritty defense.
Yeah, apparently, TJ, it's not hard to beat Washington State now. So apparently, it was only hard week one.
They're the worst team in the conference now.
So a Pac-12 BeaversEdge power ranking tease, TJ?
Yeah. If you read the final line of my power rankings last week, you would have seen what they were playing for on the Palouse last week.
Yep.
So a sneak peek to the power rankings that come out on Thursday.
Yeah, so TJ is going to have a new shakeup, and if Washington State truly does finish last in the conference, that's going to be a game that Oregon State looks at because, Arizona, that loss is going to get better these next few weeks. Yeah. I promise you that. Washington State is just getting worse and worse. But quick little appreciation for Troy Taylor, TJ. I've loved Troy Taylor for a very long time. And I should say this as just he came onto my radar because he was he had been Jake Browning's high school coach growing up.
I didn't know that.
So he was Jake Browning's coach, and then I believe there was a bit of a gap. Like when Browning was done, he took, I think, a year off or maybe something like that. Long story short, after that, he emerges as the offensive coordinator at Eastern Washington. The year they have Gage Gubert, Cooper Kupp, Kendrick Bourne, and are just lighting the world on fire, right? He parlays that into offensive coordinator and quarterbacks for Utah for a couple years. Goes and plays with Utah. Utah didn't win the Pac-12 championship in 17-18 when he was there, but again, very step up for him after being at the FCS level. Then he goes and just crushes everybody at Sacramento State. Like literally turns that Hornets program into a dominant team. And I think if I'm not, yeah. So when he left Sacramento State last year, TJ, they went 12-1.
Yeah.
And
they beat Stanford this year.
they did. That tells me he can recruit and he's got an offensive system. And again, could his, I think I'll put it this way, TJ. I think you and I could call offense if we had Cooper Kupp to throw to 4 or 5, or
Yeah.
well, more than that now. 7 years ago, Cooper Kupp was a lot younger 7 years ago, man. And if you could throw to him on most plays, I think you'd develop a good offense. But he's smart, he's creative, and Stanford's going to throw some offensive wrinkles at you. Compared to what TJ mentioned, the David Shaw old school Stanford, that's not what you're going to expect to see this year. They are different, and Stanford's defense is their weakness. They're allowing, I believe, 440 yards per game, so very much like Colorado. This seems like a get-right game for Oregon State, TJ. But offensively, you're going to get much more of a spread attack. Stanford had been line up the 10 tight ends, and we're going to run it down your throat with no receivers on the edge. So that's a big shift in offensive personnel for them. As you mentioned, their recruiting process is going to be slow. I imagine this will be a multi-year rebuild for Troy Taylor. But just for those who are keenly interested, keep an eye for Troy Taylor. He's going to have the Stanford Cardinal competitive in the ACC. I promise you that.
Yeah, he's a really good coach. Coming around to say what I think I want to see for Oregon State this weekend is a little bit off of what my analysis of the last 2 weeks have been. Is like this needs to be like a get right passing game for them. Like the offense needs to find the passing game again. You don't want to find your passing game against Michael Penix. You don't want to find your passing game against Bo Nix. Like this is it.
Wait, you don't?
You're in the confines. You're in the confines of home. The Beavers have played very good offensive football at home this season. And like now's the time to see it. Now's the time to see that performance this offense put against that UCLA defense, which is just eating folks alive, except Arizona last week. But like that, we know what this offense can do. And this is definitely the defense to do it against. Again, they're not good against the run. They're not good against the pass. They're undermanned. Like Troy Taylor will recruit some guys to come play defense for him. I don't like Stanford doesn't have a recruiting issue per se. More of again, just a paying issue per se, but this isn't the year for that. This is the year where Oregon State is for last time and who knows how long can end their series with Stanford or pause it with a 3-game win streak and a win at Reser.
So answer me this, TJ. What's your level of, obviously, like we said, we mentioned, I have no concern for Oregon State playing at home. I really, even with Washington this next week, and we've talked about it on the damn board all year, and I've been very transparent. Barring an upset this weekend, I'm probably picking Oregon State next week because I feel that confident about how well they play at home. It took a Heisman Trophy winner last year to beat the Beavers. Will it take one this year? I'm not saying that can't happen, but that's the kind of performance that needs to happen to beat Oregon State on their best day at home. And who knows, anything can happen, but TJ, you mentioned it. The Stanford team, they're 2 straight winners on the road. Massive comeback against Colorado almost a month ago now, and I believe it was the 7th biggest comeback in conference history. They were trailing 29-0, come back and win that bad boy 46-43 in double OT. I think Deion's still licking their wounds from that one. Then come home, get blasted by UCLA, stay at home, give Washington a game. And TJ, I can't remember if you were on. That might have been your vacation week, but I remember watching that game instinctually.
No, that wasn't.
Okay, so watching that game instinctually close, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, Stanford has a chance!" Like they had a chance to beat Washington. Then go on the road this last week, and as you said, go up to the Palouse, which TJ and I thought that was a tough place to play earlier in the year, and hold Cam Ward in that offense to 7 points and win 10-7. What do you make of the Stanford team? Is it just Yeah, like I can't put my finger on them. I think Oregon State's going to win, but I can't put my finger on what this team has been. Are they the team that got beat 42-7 UCLA, 42-6 by Oregon, or the team that beat Washington State 10-7, a common opponent between these Beavers and these Cardinal?
When I guess when I look at it that sense, I would say when teams attack Stanford like are a little bit more balanced, it's a little tougher because Oregon was pretty balanced and their
Yep.
offensive attack against Stanford score got ran up. UCLA, a very balanced team as well. That was a game Ethan
Yep.
Garber started, but they also ran for over 200 yards.
That's right.
Stanford had no answer for that one as well. And then USC at the beginning of the year, another just they throttled them down
They
there at the
did. That was
Coliseum.
nasty. That was nasty.
And that's I would say not a total correlation, but there've been some offenses that have put up a ton of points against Stanford. I think that's what it is. And for Washington, there was some bad turnover luck as well, and we know the Huskies'
It's true.
defense is not great, especially not
No.
playing on the road. So it makes sense that a team turning the corner a little bit would score some points on them. But overall, I mean, I don't see how this game's competitive. I don't like
Yeah,
the
it will be
Beavers.
interesting.
Not only are the Beavers not here's one last stat for you. Not
Sure.
only are the Beavers 15-1 in the last 3 seasons at Reser, but they have covered the spread by an average of more than 9.5 points
Yeah.
at home.
So
Nine and a
TJ,
half points more than what Vegas thinks.
so with that, TJ, as we close up this awesome edition of the podcast, again, thanks to everyone for tuning in. It's been a great chit chat with TJ and I. With that, are you taking the points in this one? Oregon State 21-point favorite, 54.5 point over under in this one. I think I'm hammering Oregon State, and I think I'm hammering the over,
Yeah, I would take
TJ.
21. I would take 21.
Um, it's supposed to be dry on
Yep.
Saturday, which is key. And like you said, I think a balanced attack. I don't know. I just don't see Stanford being able to put up the kind of points they put up against Colorado or Washington. But then again, them putting up 33 on Washington. I know we okay, let me ask you this, TJ, to close out objectively. Do you take Oregon State's defense or Washington's defense on a neutral field right now against each other? Right? Good
Probably Oregon
question.
State's. Probably
Okay,
Oregon State's, but I mean,
right? Okay, so
not
that's
performance wise, neither is given much to fawn over.
so that's where I think this conversation becomes interesting. But at the end of the day, it's 2 weeks before senior day. I know there could be a thought that the Beavers are going to overlook Stanford and but look ahead to Washington. That would be understandable. It's only human. We've all done it. Who on this podcast hasn't looked ahead and went, well, that Washington game is 4:30, probably going to be college game day. So if we're doing it, folks, guarantee you everyone else is doing it too. But I do think all that aside, Oregon State will take care of business, TJ. I like them to win at home. And it would just, I'm not saying things can't happen, but it would be shocking and surprising to me if that second loss in 2.5 years came to a team like Stanford.
I agree.
So, with all that being said, TJ and I definitely like the Beavers in this matchup. Make sure to tune in to our predictions later in the week as TJ, Dylan Callahan Crowley, and Ryan Harlan will all be giving our projections. And then we also mentioned our Pac 12 power rankings. We've got the injury report coming up later this week, statistical comparison, you name it. We're going to have a ton of content leading into this matchup. So definitely make sure to stay tuned to the Edge podcast and everything over at BeaversEdge.com from TJ, Dylan, Ryan, and myself. And TJ, excited to see you this weekend down at Reser. Excited to get back to Corvo. And thanks for joining me on this edition of the pod, man. Looking forward to seeing you this weekend and obviously talking.
Yeah, always, buddy. I'll see you at the stadium.
Sounds like a plan, man. And definitely, as always, if you see TJ at the stadium, say what's up. Say BeaversEdge.com. We love to see you guys. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of the Edge podcast. We'll be back next week breaking down the game versus Stanford. Looking ahead to Washington, 4:30 ABC.